We're here to talk about ICE in Chesterfield, and Brad's also going to talk about some of his reporting on the statewide nominees involving immigration. All right, so I think we've got a decent number of people joining in now. Let's talk about what happened yesterday. Really, let's go back to, I guess, Monday night when you texted me and said you heard ICE agents were going to be at Chesterfield County Jail or Chesterfield County Courthouse detaining people. So Brad texted me. He basically said, "Hey, I'm going there in the morning. What are you doing? Do you want to go?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do want to go." So we show up. Brad is the court uh, expert. So we show up, and then describe what kind of happened, the layout of it and everything.
So I'm Brad Kutner. I'm the Richmond Bureau Chief for Radio IQ, or a statewide NPR outlet based in Roanoke. I cover the Capitol here in Richmond. I've been covering the Capitol here for about almost 15, 20 years. I've been working on immigration and immigration adjacent stories here in the Central Virginia area for a couple of weeks, ever since the earliest very public arrest of an alleged MS-13 member in Northern Virginia that Governor Glenn Youngkin championed alongside AG Pam Bondi. Just trying to figure out exactly who was getting taken, where, and why. Unfortunately, we were not able to learn much of that. But I've stuck with it in those pursuits. I've tried to get a hold of immigration attorneys who are willing to speak with me. I finally got one after about 3 weeks of phone tag Monday afternoon. They were the one who told me that ICE agents had started showing up in Chesterfield as early as Friday of last week. He said that there were a couple agents that they were positioned in the courthouse and that they were taking people after hearings. Again, a lot of what we might say here is hard to confirm because ICE has been less than forthcoming with a lot of information. And as Jarvis and I will explain what we saw yesterday, whether intentionally on the part of the sheriff's office or at the request of ICE, their actions were obscured from the public, which includes the press. But Jarvis, I'll let you go ahead and get into Tuesday morning.
Yeah, so Tuesday morning we were in the courthouse. We went into a couple courtrooms. We didn't see anything. We didn't see anyone resembling an ICE agent or anything like that. Then we venture back outside and we see an SUV backing into a fenced area that you cannot see from the public area. Like you can see the SUV backing in, but then the deputies shut the gate. You can't see what happens. And then that SUV pulled out a few minutes later and they left. The driver of it waved to us kind of mockingly, in my opinion. He was like too happy to see us.
He has the right to wave, like we have the right to watch.
I'm not criticizing him for waving, but it was definitely it was a show he was putting on. So we were sitting there at a picnic table after that, kind of thinking we weren't really gonna see anything that day. And then we heard from someone. I don't know how we're going to identify that person.
Just another source within the
Yeah.
courthouse, we can say.
So they told us that the ICE agents were actually standing in the hallway of the General District Court. So we go in, we see them. They were described exactly how this source told us they were, in my opinion. They even described it down to their accent, which was a New York accent. So we go in, we sit on a bench for a few minutes, and we're basically like, fuck it, let's just go ask them if they're ICE. So I
To
walk
be fair,
up.
it was you, Jarvis, who drummed up the courage to confront the alleged ICE officers, and I give you mad props for that.
Well, thank you, but I wasn't gonna be out there for hours, waking up early as hell, and not at least try. So I walk up to him and I'm like, "Hey, Brandon Jarvis, Brad Kutner. I'm sorry that I introduced you, Brad. I know you didn't love that, but I said we're journalists and can we ask you a question?" They didn't really say anything. I was like, "Are you ICE?" And then they kind of just like silently looked around and then were like, "We don't talk to press." And I was like,
I
"Well,
think
can
they
you
were told they were not allowed to talk to press.
Yeah, which normal people aren't typically told that." And then I was like, "Well, can you confirm or deny that you are ICE?" And they were like, "No, we can't." So we were like, "All right, well, have a good day." And we left. So after that, we didn't really have a story still. Cause I mean, we knew they were ICE basically, but like to report a story, you have to have something solid. So we start working. I eventually got in touch with the Chesterfield sheriff who confirmed that ICE agents were in the building. They had detained 6 people on Friday, 6 people on Monday. and we later learned they detained 2 more people yesterday. The sheriff, as you mentioned earlier, when we didn't see ICE in the building that morning, the sheriff is requested that they do all of these detainments out of the public view to prevent something like what happened in Charlottesville last month, where they ended up having protests or it wasn't even last month; it was April. They had protests from a public
Time
detainment,
flies. Yeah.
and so the sheriff told me yesterday he's asked them to do that to keep it out of the public view. He said he cannot stop ICE from coming into the building, and his deputies are not assisting in the physical arrest, keyword physical, but the deputies are assisting in directing the people after they're done with their court proceeding into that cashier's hallway, which is separate from the public. The public can't walk into the cashier's hallway. So he's directing them into that cashier's hallway, or his deputies are, and that's where ICE is waiting. And you've been in court a lot. Is it if someone in a hearing, if their case gets dismissed, can't they just leave out the regular door?
So I didn't do a lot of criminal work, especially at that low a level. So I'm not super familiar with normal process. What I know I saw is they were directing defendants to leave through the same door that we later learned was this kind of.
Yeah,
I think one person referred to it as the clerk's room, as
yeah,
kind of a processing post hearing space. And I was watching folks come in and out of there from the hallway. And yeah, so I mean. Yeah. So we again, we did not see much. They were not taking, as you mentioned in Charlottesville, folks were getting taken out the front door, and that led to some public dust ups. But no, here everything was kept behind closed doors. Yeah,
yeah. And so Leonard said it's the cashier's hallway, and then I
Leonard
had
is the sheriff, by the way.
yeah, yes, Carl Leonard is the sheriff. Sorry, I'm from Chesterfield, so it's like a first name thing here. But he said that they are directing them there, and then I've had defense attorneys describe to me what that situation is like. So when you get into that hallway, you go down a hall, and then you go down an elevator, and you go out the side door, and you're in that car. So you completely are obscured from the public. No one can see it happening. And I've also had defense attorneys say that they've been in that room and the ICE agents are in there, or ICE officers. I was corrected in my email yesterday. They're not actually agents.
Okay.
Um, and so that they're just standing in there not saying anything, and that's completely abnormal. They're dressed in plain clothes. I mean, I was dressed nicer than them yesterday, and they just are standing there in jeans, not talking, kind of being like intimidating in a way, and
They
it's
were
weird.
shorter than I thought they would be, but
They were
maybe
they
we're
were
just
short.
tall.
I got in trouble recently for making fun of a short politician, so I'm trying to be careful about that. But they they just stand there and they don't say anything, and it's interesting. They don't have badges. So I asked Sheriff Leonard if he's requiring them to have badges, because some of the defense attorneys were said that he told them that, and he said no, he's not requiring them to wear badges, but he is requiring them to show all the proper credentials and everything before they enter the courthouse. And he also told me that they have no interaction with the public, and they're not anywhere that the public can see. And I quickly was like, well, actually, I literally walked up to them in the public hallway yesterday. And he didn't seem happy about that. He kind of seems overwhelmed with the situation in general, and he wants them to go. He said, I kind of wish everyone would just read the media and see that ICE is there, not come, so that ICE will just leave me alone. Um, which presents
Imagine
a
being
whole,
an undocumented person trying to pay a parking ticket.
yeah. Well, that also brings me to my other thing. So Youngkin and Governor Youngkin has been saying like these are violent criminals we're getting off the street. But I mean, all these reports are showing that they're not violent criminals. They're coming in for traffic violations. Like the Richmond Times Dispatch reported on someone who came in to pay a fine for not having registration. And then what was Marcus's story this morning?
Marcus
Someone,
had, and to be fair, to be fair, just to clarify, the Times Dispatch person named had a cocaine possession charge from a decade ago, which
yeah,
I think lines up
2010.
with some Virginia elected officials' cocaine possession charges. But additionally, yeah, there's also new research out of Cato Institute, which suggests 65% of 65% of people taken by ICE had no convictions, 93% no violent convictions. And this is of 200,000, over 200,000 that Cato got, 200,000 arrests that Cato got access to since of October of last year. The top criminal violations were immigration violations. This is where a lot of folks talk about overstaying visas and the like, traffic and nonviolent crimes. Youngkin has continued to say that Virginia will assist in the removal of violent criminals. But when I specifically asked him multiple times about the removal of nonviolent offenders, he assured me that Virginia would assist ICE with all of their duties. He did not seem interested in distinguishing between those violent offenders and those otherwise.
Yeah, and that brings us to my whole point. I'm not arguing the principle, whatever the legality of them being here. I'm not trying to argue that. It's more so they keep pointing to these people being violent criminals when the proof is not showing that they're violent criminals. So if they are just deporting people for being here illegally, I mean that's a thing. They're breaking the law there. They need to say it with their chest,
and
like that's
that's and
why you're
that's
doing it.
and immigration law. So I did do some immigration work at so I covered the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, covered federal courts for about 10 years. And when you go to immigration court, if you start the process, you enter the country in order to claim asylum. You have to do it in the country in which you're claiming asylum. So that's why folks come to the U.S. So illegally, it's to enter the border and then claim asylum. If you lose in your original asylum case, your appeal goes directly to the Court of Appeals in your region. There's 11 courts of appeals below the U.S. Supreme Court. So I would read rulings on immigration disputes where facts of the case were disputed and the like. I did laugh. It's only laughable because it's so bleak. But when Trump and friends were using tattoos as identifiers for what they alleged were criminal offenders, gang members who were entering the country, a frequent part of an asylum claim was somebody as a child was brought into a gang against their will, or because it was the only form of life that they knew, that the gang was how things were run there. So they would join the gang, get the tattoos at a young age. Then something awful would happen. Their family members would get killed, something would go wrong, and so they'd flee their home country and come to the U.S. So when the Trump administration says these people have tattoos that signify their membership in a gang, it's likely because they got the tattoos because they were at one point in a gang and seeking asylum to get away from that gang. Again, this was a frequent reoccurring theme I saw in appellate rulings, and by no means is it all of these cases. But another thing that a lot of folks will talk about is, especially I've heard this from the conservative side, is that Obama removed more people than Trump has. And that is true. But notably, Obama followed the legal process to remove these people, offered due process to these people, which suggests that it's possible to remove that many people if you follow the legal process. The ongoing disputes over due process, over the placement. I could go deeper if you want, but we could talk about this morning too.
Well, let's talk about this morning, but first let's talk about what Delegate Mark Earley, he's a Chesterfield delegate, said, who supports. He's pretty far to the right. He's not like he's far to the right. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
And he hasn't passed a bill in the Democratic-controlled General Assembly in it during his time. So, I mean, that shows he's not really in the middle. But he made a statement yesterday applauding removing crime from the street, but also saying, as a defense attorney himself, that he supports due process. Are these people getting due process, in your opinion, as
I
a
mean,
court reporter?
I'm not a lawyer, but I can point to, again, the headline-making arrest of an alleged MS-13 member by Governor Youngkin, a couple months back. I don't know if you guys remember. He had a silenced pistol, and I think there was a poster. He was arrested in his mom's garage. This alleged leader of MS-13 in the region. Um, and almost as quickly as he was detained, the federal gun charges, illegal possession of a firearm as a documented person. I can't remember what the specifics of the title are, but those charges were dropped, and then the person was immediately deported, which that is the definition of a lack of due process. Had they gone to trial, they could have very easily, convicted this person for gun charges and then removed him, and that would have been fine under the letter of the law, best to my understanding. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been covering this stuff for a while. Had they given him the proper trial, arguably like the Obama administration did, or as conservatives claim they did, then you could have had that person removed here eventually. They would have served their time here in Virginia or in a federal facility someplace. But that also speaks to concerns, even from attorneys that I didn't know that I met in the hallway in Chesterfield County Court yesterday. I had a source was introducing me to people, perhaps too willingly, and one person was very disinterested in speaking to me, except when I asked how the local justice system felt about the removal of defendants for criminal charges before they had the chance to have those charges heard. And I said, does this rob Chesterfield County of justice? And he said that's one way to look at it, but also think of the victims of those crimes. They aren't getting the chance to get access to justice either. I read that when Hurley sent that statement, Early, excuse me, sent that statement to you, it did stand out to me because Youngkin was so gung ho about depriving due process to these people. A lot of folks, a lot of amateur internet attorneys are going to argue that the undocumented lack constitutional protections. That is not true. But also under the current administration, it seems like they're getting away with it. So there's that.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that real quick before we talk about this morning, Sheriff Carl Leonard sent me a message last night saying he is concerned about the unintended consequences of these actions and that these actions will deter some victims and witnesses from actually coming to court in fear of being detained, which will result in court cases not being able to go forward. And if that happens, victims will have their justice denied. So that's
So this is like, so Virginia is incredibly diverse, especially Northern Virginia, suburbs outside of DC, and increasingly areas like Chesterfield and more rural regions. As land becomes cheaper and migrant populations get more money, they're buying land, they're building communities. But the police in these diverse districts want to open their doors to everyone to justice. There was a bill that was pushed by Democrats. I think it was either this session or the session before, that would have allowed, I think, DACA recipients to become police officers. And there was testimony from the Prince William County Police Department.
yeah.
There was testimony from she wasn't an officer, but she had some administrative role because they wouldn't let her be an officer because of her status. And she is like weeping, talking about how much she wants to serve her community and how much she wants to better her community, asking to be a police officer to serve those who need this help. And the Prince William County Police Department chief backed her up in it. And I believe Youngkin vetoed that bill in the end. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a disconnect between there's just definitely a disconnect between the federal level messaging around the impacts that undocumented populations are having in communities in places like Virginia, and the messaging coming from those local police departments that are seeking more contact with these communities that could face more. If you want to say they're going to face more criminality, you could point it to the fact that they don't feel comfortable discussing these issues with the police. So how do you solve that problem? And Trump's solution is to get rid of all of them. And we'll see if that sways voters.
We'll see. So talk to me real quick about this morning. There was a protest at the courthouse.
So I got a call from a friend who said NAACP was holding a protest this morning. Honestly, I knew it had already hit about 95 degrees, and I was like, no, I'm good. And I've got this larger story I'm working on for tomorrow. But then I heard from another source in the courthouse that the Proud Boys might be staging a counter protest. And unfortunately, if I've got two sides to an argument, I usually show up to something. So I hauled ass down to Chesterfield County. thankfully, there's one protest, a small group of folks, older folks, mostly older folks, a couple younger folks, some NAACP members, excuse me, um, that were chanting and holding signs in view of that, excuse me, detainee loading, prisoner loading area.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that's where your normal criminal defendants come in and out when they get detained. I have no doubt the tent exists to provide shade for those as they wait, as they collect more people, so they can save on gas. I don't know. I'm not adding extra layers of sinisterness to the detainee shipping lane,
Yeah, I
but
was actually told yesterday they're doing construction, so that's part of the construction too, is to be able to deliver stuff and not be in the sun. But anyways, continue.
yeah. So there were some folks chanting there. Allegedly, by the time I'd showed up, people were there. They had said somebody was being loaded in, and they could see them, and that they were chanting on their behalf, and they were chanting in Spanish. The people united will never be defeated. They were telling the officers they don't have to do they don't have to do Trump's job for him. So that went on for a few minutes, again, peacefully. Then walked back to the front of the courthouse where NAACP had set up a press conference where them and some community members spoke out against the presence of ICE. Consistent themes were, much like what the sheriff there mentioned, what impact the presence of ICE could have on those seeking justice who um, may not be documented and could fear deportation. Also important to remember that it's not even necessarily the undocumented. We might have lost Brandon there. Hope he can hop back on. Oh, his phone overheated. It's very hot in his apartment. He has a fourth floor apartment. Oh, um, okay. So I'm gonna keep this going for now because we have so many viewers. Um, so Jarvis, I can see your texts, but I don't know how to respond. So I go over to the NAACP event. Where speakers, including the Chesterfield County Circuit or Chesterfield County Clerk, Amanda Pohl, spoke out against the presence of ICE. Thanks, Cam. Spoke out against the presence of ICE being there. Like I said, she expressed concern. Specifically, she talked about a woman or a person, a documented person who might be facing domestic abuse, showing up to court and seeking a protective order to keep an abusive spouse or significant other out of their house. Would they be afraid of ICE coming in and taking them? Sorry, it would be really great if Jarvis came back. I'm on radio, so video's still new. So again, some short speeches by NAACP and Amanda Pohl. I left shortly after that, though some other reporters were starting to show up, and protesters were still standing near the prisoner takeaway zone. Yeah. Oh, and we also heard as of this morning that at least one more person was swept up by ICE. This person, according to Marcus Schmidt at Virginia Mercury, was there on a traffic violation and driving without a license. Again, I think we can all agree any violent criminality, any serious criminality requires the wheels of justice to turn before they can be removed. Hey, Brandon's coming back. Love this. Hey, you there, buddy?
This is crazy heat wave. My phone inside my apartment overheated. But continue. I could hear you through Anna's computer, so you're doing
Okay.
great.
So Schmidt heard from Poll that another person had been detained today. So I think that brings up the total number to 15. I don't think any of us have heard from Youngkin on this specifically. So no, you got a statement from Youngkin and Miaris yesterday on this? You want to talk
What
about that?
I didn't get a specific statement from them. It was their comments at the press gaggle for that event yesterday, and they both just said basically like they're getting violent criminals off. And Miara's also hinted at like 1.4 million people who had already been adjudicated, that they were rounding up during the Biden administration. I didn't fact check that. I'm not sure if that's a real number or not. But they kind of just went along the same path that Republicans are doing, is like we're getting criminals off the street. And like I said, I guess it just depends on what your definition of a criminal really is, and if that statement is true or not.
And again, the nature of asylum claims, of immigration law, it's very complex, and it's often people don't win. Often people do get removal orders, and there's room for that. Um, but I'm working on a larger story now. I guess now's the time as good as any.
Yeah.
So I'm working on a larger story in which I've spoken to both Virginia gubernatorial candidates, Winsome Earl Sears, Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears, and Democrat Abigail Spanberger about their feelings on immigration. Specifically, I spoke to the mother of the undocumented mother of 3 U.S. born children who currently lives in Virginia. This comes after a story I did a few weeks back, which talked about a law change in Virginia that allowed custody of a child to transfer if the parent is deported. There's a fairly simple administrative process. It's called a trigger law that allows custody of a child to be transferred if somebody in the past it had been like death and things like that. But they expanded the law in 2021 to include deportation. So that law was being used. After I wrote that story, I heard from this mother who wanted to speak about her situation. She's been here 20 years. She crossed in the country, was given a phone number by immigration when she crossed the border. She called it, this is back in 2003-ish. When she called the number, the only option they gave was in English, and she didn't speak English, so she couldn't really interact with it. She made her way up to a DC suburb where she's been living. She's since had 3 kids with another undocumented person. Her husband was deported in late May in front of her children. The ICE officers needed his passport, and instead of opening the door, they allowed the U.S. citizen daughter to bring out the passport over fears that the mother would be taken as well. But yeah, I've got some pretty heart wrenching testimony from this woman who watched her husband be removed and is now afraid of her own removal. But I asked her what message she had for the gubernatorial candidates, and I presented that message to both of them as well as Youngkin. And my full report on that comes out tomorrow morning. So I hope you all will tune in to Radio IQ. Follow me on Twitter, Brad Kutner, at Brad Kutner, Kutner, or just keep an eye out for my coverage.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, Brad. I know you're busy and you got to go finish that story. And I was going to tell you to plug yourself, but you handled that business already. That's the radio
I'm a
guy
regular
in you.
Michael Poe.
Yeah.
um,
All right. All right.
all
Thanks
right.
for everybody for tuning in.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Bye bye.